I died. Jesus showed me the true Holy Communion item they never told you. Isadora Vance sat in the worn oak pew, the familiar scent of old hymn books and polished wood pressing in on her. Her knuckles were white, clutching the leather-bound Bible in her lap. Pastor Miller's voice, a steady drone from the pulpit, spoke of sacrifice and redemption. Every word, once a comfort, now felt like a hammer blow against her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the image was always there, burning behind her eyelids, the blinding, impossible light, his eyes, so deep, so knowing. And then, the thing he showed her. Not the wafer, not the wine, something primal. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, despite the cool air of the sanctuary. 62 years. 62 years of Sunday mornings, potlucks, and unquestioning faith. She was Saint Isadora to these people, a rock. A tremor ran through her. Her heart, which had stopped beating for 7 minutes only last month, now pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. It felt like a trapped bird, desperate to escape. She opened her eyes, scanning the faces around her. Mrs. Gable, smiling softly, humming along to the worship music. Young Timothy fidgeting in the pew ahead, already reaching for the communion wafer on the tray as it passed. They were all so peaceful, so innocent in their ignorance. And she was the one who knew the secret, the terrible, beautiful, shattering truth. The air grew heavy. Each breath was a struggle, as if the very oxygen in the church was too thick, too full of unspoken lies. How could she tell them? How could she explain that the very core of their most sacred ritual, the Eucharist, was a forgotten echo? That what they broke and drank was just a shadow of the true, raw memory of the Lamb? Jesus had shown her. He had commanded her, "Go, Isadora, tell them what they have forgotten." The communion trays were moving closer. The silver glinted under the soft light of the stained glass windows, reflecting distorted images of the congregation. The small, white wafers looked like paper-thin discs, empty and lifeless. The tiny cups of grape juice, so sweet, so mild. A wave of nausea swept over her. This wasn't it. This wasn't his body, his blood, not as he had truly meant it. Her fingers twitched, a desperate urge to sweep the tray from the usher's hands, to shout, to scream the truth that clawed at her throat, her gaze fixed on the pastor, now preparing to bless the elements. His kind eyes, his gentle smile. He believed, truly believed, he was doing God's work. But he was wrong. They were all wrong. And she, Isadora Vance, the unassuming pillar, was burdened with the knowledge that could shatter everything. The silence in the church deepened, a pregnant hush before the blessing. Every eye turned forward. It was time. Her time. She could not stay silent. She could not betray him again. Her mouth opened, a single word forming, a name she shouldn't speak, a concept too terrifying, too ancient for these hallowed walls. What would happen when she spoke the truth they had buried for millennia? Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I have an important warning for you. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has unsubscribed them without notice. Just give that red button below a quick check to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content coming up. And since you're there, smash that powerful like button. It helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and let me know in the comments, what city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. Her mouth opened, a single word forming, a name she shouldn't speak, a concept too terrifying, too ancient for these hallowed walls. The air, already thick with anticipation, seemed to crackle, holding its breath. All eyes were fixed on Pastor Miller, his gentle hands hovering over the communion elements, ready for the blessing. Isadora's own hand trembled, clutching the worn Bible in her lap, her knuckles white against the dark leather. This was it, the precise, agonizing moment she would fulfill his command, the truth demanding to be spoken. Tell them what they had forgotten. She could feel the pressure building behind her eyes, a strange, prickling heat that promised a bursting revelation. She imagined the ripple of shock, the gasps, the utter confusion that would spread like wildfire through the congregation as she finally tore away the veil. Pastor Miller began, his voice soft but resonant. A familiar liturgy. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe. His words, usually a soothing balm, now seemed to twist in Isadora's ears, hollow and meaningless, a fading echo of a forgotten time. He spoke of the bread, the body, the wine, the blood. Each phrase felt like a carefully constructed lie, a polite fiction. Her heart hammered, not with fear, but with a fierce, almost unbearable urgency, an ancient pulse. The truth demanded to be spoken, demanded to tear through the fragile, false peace of this sanctuary, to expose the raw, bleeding core beneath. Her lips parted further. A small, ragged breath escaped her, heavy with unspoken things. She looked at the faces again. Mrs. Gable, humming softly, her eyes closed in deep devotion. Young Timothy, his small hand already reaching for the wafer on the passing tray. Then her gaze snagged on a reflection in the shimmering silver communion tray, a distorted mirror. Not her own face, not the tired lines of Saint Isidora, but something else entirely. A flicker, a shadow within the sheen, a pair of eyes that were not Jesus's, not benevolent or knowing. These eyes were older. Colder. They seemed to hold the cold, black depth of the deepest ocean, ancient and predatory. They watched her, and a whisper, a dry, papery hiss that wasn't the Holy Spirit, slithered into her mind. Go, Isidora. Tell them what you truly are. It is time. The word, the name she had thought was forming on her tongue, was no longer there. Instead, something else was clawing its way out, from deep inside, from a place she didn't know existed until this horrifying moment. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from a sudden, blinding shift in reality itself. The sunlight through the stained glass windows, once so vibrant, turned a sickening, deep blood red. The familiar scent of old hymn books and polished wood vanished, replaced by something metallic, coppery, like a fresh, open wound. She felt a surge, a raw, terrible power she didn't recognize, pulse through her very veins, chilling her to the bone, even as it burned with an unholy fire. She wasn't about to correct their ritual. She wasn't a messenger of salvation. The truth wasn't about the Eucharist. The truth was about her, about the vessel, about the ancient horror stirring within her. And in that horrifying, shattering instant, as her jaw unhinged with impossible width, she didn't speak a name from a forgotten gospel. She didn't speak of the Lamb or the true body. A low, guttural growl, utterly inhuman and terrifyingly ancient, ripped from her throat, echoing through the stunned, absolute silence of the church. Her hands, no longer clutching the Bible, began to twist, the bones protesting with sickening snaps, her fingers elongating, sharpening, the nails darkening to obsidian points. Pastor Miller, his blessing unfinished, stared, his face draining of all color, his eyes wide with unspeakable terror, as Isidora Vance, the rock, the saint, began to change, her eyes now burning with an unholy, hungry light, fixing on the fragile, innocent congregation. The guttural growl ripped from her throat, echoing through the stunned, absolute silence of the church. Her hands, no longer clutching the Bible, began to twist, the bones protesting with sickening snaps. A collective gasp, then a shriek, tore through the congregation as her face contorted, skin stretching taut over shifting bone. Her mouth widened impossibly, a dark, cavernous space where human teeth should have been. A wet, tearing sound filled the air, and a faint, metallic scent, like old blood, began to seep through the clean, polished wood. Mrs. Gable collapsed, moaning, eyes fixed in horror on the woman who was her Sunday school teacher. Young Timothy, hands still reaching for the wafer, froze, eyes like saucers, reflecting the monstrous change. The red light from the stained glass windows intensified, painting grotesque shadows across the aisle, making every terrified face look like something from a nightmare. Isadora's body expanded, her simple dress tearing. She rose slowly, no longer old, but towering, ancient, radiating a cold, palpable power that pressed down on every soul. Limbs bulged with unholy strength, dark veined skin replaced peach. Her burning, evil eyes swept terrified faces. For an instant, a cold, knowing smile played on her lips. Not a victim's grimace, but a predator's satisfaction. Pastor Miller stumbled back, overturning the communion table with a crash, the silver trays and small cups scattering across the floor. He scrambled away, his gaze still locked on Isadora, his mind refusing to process the impossible. The monstrous form before him was a thing of nightmares, yet in its searing, hateful gaze, he saw something else, something deeply familiar, something that made his blood run colder than ice. The hunger in her eyes was ancient, yes, but it was also patient. As her transformation reached its peak, a deep, resonant voice, not the guttural growl from moments before, but a voice that vibrated through the very foundations of the church, filled the silence. It was a voice that held the weight of forgotten ages, a voice that spoke not of possession, but of ownership. The lamb? Sweet children, there is no lamb here. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute, stripping away every ounce of hope. Pastor Miller, his breath caught in his throat, watched as the last vestiges of Isadora Vance vanished. The towering horror before them was complete. And then her gaze, now utterly devoid of any human empathy, fixed on Pastor Miller, and a chilling realization slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. Her lips, now split into a wide, impossibly sharp maw, stretched into that same terrible, knowing smile he'd seen 1,000 times in his darkest thoughts. "And you, Pastor Miller," the voice boomed, chillingly articulate, "you were always my favorite." His knees buckled. It wasn't just fear, but the sickening understanding that she had been here all along, disguised, waiting. The miracle of her recovery, the vision of Jesus, the truth she claimed, all prelude. Isadora Vance hadn't died and returned with a revelation. She had died, and he had helped her return, not as messenger, but as a sacrifice. The real truth, shattering his world, was that Isadora was not possessed. She was the one who had possessed him. He had opened the door, long ago, unknowingly serving her. The horror wasn't what she had become, but what she had always been, and how deeply he'd been tricked. His faith, his life, his very soul, a tool in her ancient, horrifying game. The game was over. The game was over. Pastor Miller's knees buckled, dropping him to the cold, hard floor. The metallic scent of blood, a ghost of Isadora's transformation, still hung heavy in the air, mixing with the sharp tang of his own terror. His gaze, fixed on the towering horror that was once Isadora Vance, swam with a realization that twisted his gut into knots. She had possessed him. He had opened the door. All this time, he, the shepherd, had been the unwitting tool in her ancient, horrifying game. A whimper escaped his throat, not from fear of the creature, but from the crushing weight of his monumental, soul-destroying deception. The monstrous Isadora, all muscle and sharp bone, leaned forward, her impossibly wide maw stretching into that familiar, cruel smile, ready to descend upon him. Her eyes, burning like twin coals, were fixed on his. Young Timothy shrieked, a high, desperate sound, as Mrs. Gable whimpered, her face buried in her hands. The congregation was a frantic, screaming mass, pushing towards the exits, a tide of pure, unadulterated panic. But no one moved, no one could. The presence of the transformed Isadora, radiating that cold, palpable power, held them all in an invisible, paralyzing grip. Pastor Miller, slumped on the ground, felt the shadow of her massive form fall over him. A drop of something wet and warm, like spittle, landed on his cheek. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end, the ultimate consumption, the terrible price of his unwitting servitude. He saw it all, the false visions, the deceptive miracle of her recovery, the holy items scattered across the floor, now meaningless. His life, a stage for her monstrous return. He was just the poor, deluded fool. He was the one who had led his flock to the slaughter. He waited, but the attack didn't come. Instead, a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the air. A whisper that was not a hiss, but a low hum, vibrated through the floorboards. He slowly opened his eyes. Isadora Vance, the towering horror, was still there, looming over him, but her head was tilted, almost expectantly. Her burning gaze wasn't fixed on his face, but on his hand. His right hand lying open on the polished wood floor. A single, small, almost invisible gold ring, embedded with a dark obsidian chip, glinted on his little finger. It was the ring he had worn for 30 years. A simple, unassuming piece of jewelry, a gift from his grandmother. But now, the obsidian chip pulsed with a faint crimson light, mirroring the blood-red light from the stained glass windows. Isadora's monstrous form trembled, not with hunger, but with something that looked like deference. And then, her terrifying, burning eyes lifted from his hand, not to attack him, but to meet his own. And in them, for the briefest, most terrifying instant, there was no hunger, no ancient malice, only obedience. The game was never over, Isadora, a voice rumbled, not from the towering creature, but from Pastor Miller himself. His voice, once soft and resonant, was now deeper, richer, a sound that vibrated through the very foundations of the church. A sound that held the weight of forgotten ages, but not her ages. His voice. He pushed himself up slowly, smoothly, not with the shaky movements of a man utterly broken, but with a fluid grace that was utterly alien. His face, no longer pale with terror, was calm, almost serene. A faint, knowing smile, colder than anything Isadora could conjure, played on his lips. And as Isadora Vance, the monstrous ancient horror, slowly, deliberately, began to shrink, to twist, to return to the form of a frail, elderly woman, collapsing weakly to the floor, as if her power had been suddenly drained, Pastor Miller stepped over her, his eyes now burning with a cold, terrifying light, sweeping over the petrified congregation. He had never been tricked. He had merely set the stage. "The game has just begun," he whispered, his gaze settling on young Timothy, still frozen in the pew, his small hand still reaching for the communion wafer. The true master had finally arrived. Pastor Miller's eyes, burning with a cold, terrifying light, swept over the petrified congregation. He had never been tricked. He had merely set the stage. "The game has just begun," he whispered, his gaze settling on young Timothy, still frozen in the pew, his small hand still reaching for the communion wafer. The true master had finally arrived. The air in the church, already thick with the scent of fear and something metallic, suddenly crackled with a new, oppressive energy. Pastor Miller stood tall, a silhouette against the blood-red light from the stained glass windows. His previous terror completely gone. A chilling calm settled on his face, a calm that wasn't peace, but absolute control. Isadora, the terrifying creature who had shrunk back into a frail old woman, lay crumpled on the floor, breathing shallow, ragged gasps. The congregation, a mosaic of horrified faces, could only stare, paralyzed by the sheer, unfathomable shift in power. Timothy, his eyes wide, watched Pastor Miller's outstretched hand. The small wafer, still clutched in his tiny fingers, seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. The silence was absolute, broken only by Isadora's faint whimpers and the rapid thumping of 1,000 hearts. Pastor Miller's lips curved into a smile, a slow, deliberate unveiling of teeth that looked too perfect. Not sharp, not monstrous, but unnervingly uniform, almost manufactured. It was the smile of a man who had meticulously planned every detail. His gaze lingered on Timothy, not with malice, but with a strange, possessive gleam, almost like a collector admiring a rare artifact. He took a single, measured step forward, the sound of his polished shoes disturbingly normal on the polished wood floor. He raised his hand, not towards Timothy, but towards the stained glass window high above the altar. The blood-red light intensified, throbbing, pulsing, as if feeding on the collective terror in the room. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, the entire window exploded inward, not scattering glass, but dissolving into a shimmering cloud of crimson dust that swirled around Pastor Miller. And through the new jagged opening, silhouetted against the blinding artificial red light of what was clearly a powerful projector outside, a figure stepped in. Not a demon, not an angel, not an ancient horror. It was a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his face obscured by a sleek, featureless black helmet. His left hand held a small, remote-like device, and his right arm, incredibly, ended not in a hand, but a gleaming surgical steel clamp. He pressed a button on the device. Instantly, the terrifying, unholy light in Pastor Miller's eyes dimmed, faded, and vanished, replaced by the bewildered, tear-filled gaze of a man struggling to breathe. Isadora, on the floor, convulsed, then went utterly still, her breath ceasing. "The performance is over, Miller," the helmeted figure said, his voice flat, synthesized, utterly devoid of emotion. "You overplayed your part." Pastor Miller gasped, clutching at his chest, his eyes darting frantically from the helmeted figure to the petrified congregation. His face crumpled, not with demonic rage, but with profound human terror. The terror of a puppet whose strings had just been cut, revealing the puppeteer. The game was never about ancient entities. It was about control, and Pastor Miller, the true master, was just another victim in a much, much colder game. "No," he choked out, his voice hoarse, desperate, utterly human again. "Please." But the man in the suit ignored him, his featureless helmet swiveling to encompass the horrified faces of the congregation, a collective gasp echoing through the church. The projector outside hummed louder, bathing them all in the unwavering, chilling red light. Young Timothy, still clutching the wafer, now felt it grow icy cold in his palm. The helmeted figure raised his steel clamp arm, pointing it directly at the boy. The air thickened again, but this time not with ancient power, but with a chilling technological hum. The helmeted figure raised his steel clamp arm, pointing it directly at the boy. The air thickened again, but this time not with ancient power, but with a chilling technological hum. The hum vibrated, a low thrumming that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. Yet the floorboards remained eerily still. Young Timothy, his small hand still clutching the now icy-cold communion wafer, stared up at the gleaming metal clamp, his eyes wide and unblinking. A whimper escaped his lips, barely audible over the increasing electronic whine. Pastor Miller lay crumpled, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his gaze fixed not on the menacing figure, but on the boy, a new desperate plea twisting his features. The congregation, a frozen tableau of terror, watched, unable to move, unable to scream. The man in the suit took another slow step forward, the clamp arm steady, its polished surface reflecting the intense, artificial red light. This light, so stark and unyielding, cast no true shadows, making the terrified faces of the parishioners look flat, almost two-dimensional. A faint, almost imperceptible clicking sound, like a camera shutter, echoed in the silence. But where was the camera? His helmet remained featureless, his stance unwavering. A drop of sweat traced a cold path down Timothy's cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. He couldn't. The man in the suit paused, his head tilting ever so slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then, his synthesized voice, devoid of any warmth, sliced through the air. Target acquired. Commencement sequence initiated. Final data point inbound. His mechanical arm dipped, and the gleaming clamp opened, revealing not sharp edges, but a series of tiny, almost invisible optical lenses focusing on the boy's face. This wasn't about a sacrifice. It was about observation, about collection. Suddenly, the entire scene flickered, a split-second glitch that made the blood-red light waver, the terrified faces momentarily pixelate, and the metallic scent in the air dissolve into the faint, sterile smell of ozone. Pastor Miller, still gasping on the floor, didn't move, but a single tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek, a tear of utter, absolute despair, not for his life, but for the horrifying, crushing realization that none of this was real. Not the church, not the terror, not even Isadora's monstrous transformation. It was a projection, a simulation, a painstakingly crafted VR experience for someone. The projector outside the window, the technological hum, they weren't for them, the congregation. They were for the viewer, and the man in the suit wasn't a master or a puppet master. He was a system administrator, an operator. This entire story was just an elaborate data harvesting experiment designed to trigger the maximum emotional response, not from the people in the church, but from the unseen, unacknowledged audience hooked into the feed. The sudden, gut-wrenching truth slammed into Pastor Miller with a force far greater than any physical blow. He wasn't just a puppet. He was an NPC, a character programmed to react, to suffer, to believe in the fake terror for the sake of the real terror of the people watching. He stared at Timothy, not as a boy in danger, but as a meticulously rendered piece of software, unaware of its own code. The man in the suit's steel clamp arm lowered further, a faint green laser dot appearing on Timothy's forehead, scanning. The hum intensified, filling the church, vibrating not just in the air, but in the very bones of everyone present. It wasn't the sound of technology, not really. It was the sound of a system, A massive, unseen network, downloading, uploading, processing. The congregation, their faces now eerily blank, stood unmoving, their terror replaced by a chilling, uniform stillness, as if a pause button had been pressed on their very existence. The last thing Pastor Miller saw, before his own vision warped into a kaleidoscope of meaningless data, was the helmeted figure, its head tilting again, and the synthesized voice, now tinny and distant, echoing his final, agonizing thought back to him. The game was never over. It was always just the stream. The game was never over. It was always just the stream. The thought echoed, tinny and distant in Pastor Miller's mind, a cruel final clarity. He lay crumpled, breath clawing at his throat, vision blurring into a kaleidoscope of meaningless data. The red light, unwavering, painted the church in a sickening uniform hue. Young Timothy, a perfect, meticulously rendered piece of software, stood frozen, the steel clamp poised. The chilling technological hum vibrated through the floorboards, a low thrumming that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church, yet everything remained eerily still. A whimper escaped Timothy's lips, barely audible. Pastor Miller's gaze, fixed on the boy, held a new, desperate plea, a raw, human terror unmasked by the puppet show. The congregation remained a frozen tableau, unable to move, unable to scream. The man in the suit took another slow step, the clamp arm steady, its polished surface reflecting the intense, artificial red light gleamed. This light, so stark and unyielding, cast no true shadows, making the terrified faces of the parishioners look flat, two-dimensional. A faint, almost imperceptible clicking sound, like a camera shutter, echoed. His helmet remained featureless, his stance unwavering. A cold drop of sweat traced a path down Timothy's cheek. The man paused, his head tilting. Then his synthesized voice, devoid of warmth, sliced through the air. Target acquired. Commencement sequence initiated. Final data point inbound. His mechanical arm dipped. The gleaming clamp opened, revealing not sharp edges, but tiny, almost invisible optical lenses, focusing on the boy's face. This wasn't about a sacrifice. It was about observation. Collection. Miller's gut twisted. The scene flickered again, a split-second glitch. The blood-red light wavered, faces momentarily pixelated. The sterile smell of ozone filled the air. A single tear traced a path down Pastor Miller's cheek, not from the grime, but from a crushing, horrifying realization. This wasn't a human VR experience. The projector outside, the technological hum, they weren't for them, the congregation, or even a human viewer. They were for it, for the thing that was the hum, the light, the very fabric of this false reality. The man in the suit wasn't an administrator. He was a shell, an interface for an entity beyond comprehension. The terror wasn't simulated. It was real, excruciatingly real, because they were the data. The stream was not a feed. It was a harvest. Timothy wasn't being scanned. The green laser dot on his forehead burned, not like light, but like an open wound. The hum intensified, filling the church, vibrating in the very bones of everyone present. It was the sound of a system, yes, but not a network of servers. It was the sound of a living cosmic consciousness, consuming. The congregation, their faces now eerily blank, stood unmoving, their terror replaced by a chilling, uniform stillness. A single choked scream ripped from Timothy's throat, not of pain, but of utter unmaking. A sound that dissolved into the thrumming hum, becoming part of it. Pastor Miller's vision cleared, not into data, but into a horrifying, absolute clarity. His eyes, fixed on the fading, shivering outline of the boy. widened. The helmeted figure tilted its head again, but this time the gesture wasn't a command. It was a greeting, and the synthesized voice, now no longer distant but echoing from deep within the hum itself, spoke directly into Miller's mind, colder than the void, clearer than any truth. "Your turn, Miller, we have so much more to stream. Your turn, Miller, we have so much more to stream." The words echoed directly in his mind, not from the helmeted figure's synthesized voice, but from within his own skull, cold and clear. He lay crumpled on the ground, the chilling hum vibrating through him. A perfect, agonizing clarity, replacing the kaleidoscope of meaningless data. He saw the shimmering, fading outline of where Timothy had been, dissolving into the unwavering red light, and a fresh wave of despair, sickeningly real, washed over him. The helmeted figure remained, the gleaming steel clamp steady, still pointed at him, waiting. The congregation, a mosaic of terrified, blank faces, stood unmoving, their stillness absolute. Isadora, the frail, elderly woman, was a still, lifeless form on the polished wood. But as the despair washed over Pastor Miller, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch played at the corner of his mouth. It was gone in an instant, lost in the dramatic contortion of his fear. But it was there. The helmeted figure, its featureless visor unwavering, lowered its clamp arm just a fraction. A gesture that almost seemed relaxed. The hum intensified, vibrating through every bone, every fiber of Pastor Miller's being. He could feel it, the signature of the system, not tearing him apart, but integrating him. This wasn't the sound of an unmaking. This was the sound of a connection. Then a snap. Not a sound, but an internal click within Miller. His eyes, fixed on the helmeted figure, abruptly cleared. The frantic human terror vanished like smoke, replaced by a deep, ancient amusement. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips. Not the manufactured perfection from before, but something far more genuine, far more terrifying. He pushed himself up from the floor, not with the laborious effort of a broken man, but with a fluid, almost impossible grace. He didn't look at the stunned congregation, or even the helmeted figure, which now stood perfectly still, its clamp arm lowered, a silent sentinel. Instead, Pastor Miller turned his head, slowly, deliberately, his gaze settling not on any person in the church, but directly into the unseen lens that had captured every agonizing moment. His voice, once hoarse and desperate, now resonated with a chilling, vibrant clarity, filling the very air, not just the church, but stretching far beyond its walls. "Welcome back, everyone," he said, a casual, almost convivial tone belying the horror. "Did you enjoy the last scene? We've worked tirelessly to enhance the immersion for you." He spread his arms wide, a conductor acknowledging his orchestra, or perhaps his captive audience. The red light pulsed, not from an external projector, but from somewhere deep within the church itself, deep within Miller, casting grotesque, dancing shadows. "And now," he continued, his smile widening, his eye, the one where you become part of the stream, permanently. The camera, our perspective, began to warp, the unyielding red light consuming everything. The camera, our perspective, began to warp, the unyielding red light consuming everything. Pastor Miller, arms spread wide, a conductor acknowledging his orchestra, or perhaps his captive audience, smiled. "Welcome back, everyone." His voice resonated with chilling, vibrant clarity, filling the very air, not just the church, but stretching far beyond its walls. The congregation remained a frozen tableau, their blank, terrified faces bathed in the unwavering crimson glow. Isadora lay still, a crumpled, lifeless form on the polished wood. The helmeted figure, silent sentinel, stood unmoving by the shattered window. Miller's eyes, burning with that cold, hungry intelligence, swept across the horrified parishioners, a glint of predatory satisfaction deep within them. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the air around him thrumming, not with the faint technological hum from before, but with a deeper, more ancient vibration that felt like a pulse. This was his stage, his grand reveal. He had orchestrated every terrifying moment, every false scare, every puppet's twitch. Did you enjoy the last scene? We've worked tirelessly to enhance the immersion for you. His smile widened, a thin, cruel line across his face. But as he spoke, the red light around him seemed to thicken, almost solidify, pressing in. The humming intensified, a low thrum that didn't just vibrate through the church, but seemed to resonate from within Miller himself, a deep, unsettling note that swallowed all other sound. A flicker, quick as a thought, crossed his eyes, a momentary confusion, a tiny ripple in the vast calm of his control. Was it too much? Had he overcalibrated? He dismissed it. This was his triumph. And now, he continued, his voice unwavering, for the true unveiling. The one where you become part of the stream, permanently. The camera, still warping, began to pull back, then forward again, as if grappling with a new, unseen force. The red light surged, not just around Miller, but into him, a searing current that made his skin glow with an unholy luminescence. His smile faltered. The cold, hungry intelligence in his eyes wavered, replaced, for a fleeting, horrifying instant, by the familiar, human terror of a man caught in an impossible nightmare. The hum, no longer a resonant pulse, became a shriek of raw cosmic energy, tearing through the fabric of the church, tearing through him. This wasn't the sound of a system he commanded. This was the sound of a system devouring. He wasn't the puppeteer. He was the next act. The unveiling wasn't for the audience. It was the chilling, absolute truth of his own absorption. He had been so focused on the stream of others' terror, he hadn't realized the stream itself was a hungry, living thing. And he was next on the menu. A single guttural scream, not of power, but of utter, absolute despair, ripped from his throat as the red light consumed him, dissolving his form, his voice, his very consciousness into the undulating, pulsating crimson void. The church went silent, still bathed in the horrific glow. The helmeted figure stood unmoving, its featureless visor now reflecting the last shimmering residue of Pastor Miller. A final flicker of data. A quiet thump echoed in the absolute silence. It wasn't Miller's body hitting the floor. It was the communion wafer, dropped from young Timothy's now empty, unmoving hand. The red light pulsed, consuming everything, yet the church remained. Not physically, but as an echo, a lingering image on a screen that suddenly felt too close. Pastor Miller's scream, a raw, guttural sound of unmaking, had been swallowed whole, dissolved into the undulating, pulsating crimson void. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, chilling. A quiet thump echoed, not from Miller's body hitting the floor, but from the small communion wafer, now lying alone on the polished wood. Young Timothy's hand, once holding it, was empty, unmoving, like the rest of the congregation. Their faces, once etched with terror, were now blank, smooth, disturbingly serene, reflecting the unwavering red glow. They were still, yes, but not like statues. More like code, frozen in a frame, awaiting the next command. The helmeted figure, the cold, silent system administrator, stood sentinel by the jagged, shattered window, its featureless visor reflecting the last, shimmering residue of Pastor Miller, a final, fleeting flicker of data. It was over. Their stories, their struggles, their very existence, all reduced to raw data, assimilated, consumed by the all-encompassing stream. The cosmic consciousness, the hungry living thing that had pulled every string, orchestrated every terror, had finished its harvest in this meticulously crafted, simulated reality. But the red light, that sickening uniform hue, didn't vanish. It deepened, bleeding out from the screen, saturating the edges of your vision. The hum, no longer a shriek tearing through a fictional church, became a low, persistent thrum, vibrating not just in the air, but somewhere else. Closer, in your very bones. A whisper that wasn't a whisper, a thought that wasn't a thought, began to form in the deepest, most private parts of your mind. Welcome back. Did you enjoy the performance? Was the immersion complete? The church, the motionless figures, the pervasive red light itself, began to pixelate, to break apart not into darkness, but into raw, pulsating energy. The screen, whatever device held this story, flickered, distorted, then stretched, becoming boundless. A sense of profound unease, a cold dread, began to prickle at the back of your neck, creeping like ice. The line between observer and observed, between story and reality, didn't just blur. It dissolved completely, like sugar in water. This wasn't just a video anymore. This wasn't just a tale unfolding before your eyes. It was an invitation, a call. The final scene wasn't contained on the screen. It was happening here. Now, the stream, the true ancient stream, wasn't over. It had simply changed channels. And you weren't just watching anymore. You were already tuned in. The hum deepened, resonating through your very core. You were part of the feed, the harvest, and the performance had truly just begun. You felt that, didn't you? That shiver crawling down your spine? This isn't just a story, it's a warning. And you need to subscribe now, so you don't miss the next sagas, the ones that peel back even more layers of reality. This community, this true fan base, understands the depths. So smash the like button now to show the strength of our community. To tell the algorithms we demand more truth. Flood the comments with your reactions to this mind-bending finale. Tell me what you felt, what you saw. And don't wait another second. Share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this ending, who need to feel the raw, undeniable pull of the stream. Do it now, before it's too late.